Welcome to the TNT Real Estate Podcast, where we spark conversations that set you up for real estate success. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Tanya, and each week we bring you expert tips on navigating Northern Ontario's real estate market. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, we've got the tools to help you thrive.
Have you ever had a home inspection go completely sideways? Well, today we're going to walk you through home inspection red flags, and let's get right into it. So Tanya, what was the worst thing that an inspector has ever found?
Okay, so we once looked at a house that was probably about 90 or so years old, and it had been in this family for, I think, 2 generations, and it needed a lot of work. So we're totally okay with a lot of the things that we saw on the surface and completely aware that maybe there were some wiring issues and various things to take care of. But then it wasn't until we went into the attic and we found that there was huge evidence of a past fire. So all the rafters are totally charred upstairs, and this home was still standing. And none of the family members had any recollection of when this fire had occurred.
Like the people that were selling the house?
Yeah, the people were, it was like an estate sale, and it had been in their family since I think like their grandfather had built it, that type of property. But yeah, we were shocked to see nobody had any idea what we were going to find in the attic. And it was totally, the beams were totally charred. And it was a really, really cute character home with like all brick on all sides. So definitely there was concerns of structural issues because of those rafters having been charred, and what would have it required to bring it up to safety standards and to make sure that it would stay intact. So yeah, we walked away from...
I was going to say, needless to say, you didn't buy the house?
No, we walked away from that deal. Absolutely. Yeah. Have you seen any red flags or any issues come up?
Well, I mean, there's always like the foundation issues and wiring issues, but I think the weirdest thing that I've seen in a home inspection was the home inspector jump off the ladder because a dead snake was in the ductwork that he was inspecting.
Oh my gosh.
But it ended up just being like the skin of an old dead snake, so it wasn't that serious. But that was quite the surprise. It was a good story for the brokerage.
Yeah, absolutely. That is not something I think I would have a worse time buying a house with dead snake and snake skins.
Just the thought of it
in the ductwork. Oh
yeah. Okay, so let's get into red flag number 1, which is foundation issues. So when is it serious? When is it maybe not serious? When do you just completely walk away?
Yeah, so that's so hard to quantify really, because often we see foundations where there's natural settlement cracks, right? Yeah. There's natural cracks in a home that happen after it settles. So it's really going to depend on what your inspector has to say about these cracks or any sort of foundation issues that they see. But I think one of the things that we see probably most commonly in our practice is water in the basement due to sometimes it's foundational issues. Sometimes it's just due to grading or, lack of eaves troughs and other runoff kind of mitigation stuff. So I think it's always important to listen to your inspector to see like what the issue is with the foundation, whether it's maybe a structural issue related to cracks or if it's perhaps a water infiltration issue.
Yeah. And they'll be able to tell you whether is it just the parging that's cracked on the outside. And they always say, if it's a 1/4 inch thicker or more, then chances are it might be a bigger issue. And then I always look for whether the foundation is offset or not, so like if it's moving laterally. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is to listen to the home inspector. They've been through thousands of these houses. But I think it's important, that's obviously a huge red flag for anybody that's buying a house, because if the foundation is crumbling, then chances are eventually the house will crumble after it, right?
Yeah. And there's also things that we can do as, realtors when you're in that process after you get the home inspection done. Oftentimes the seller is willing to have another professional come and evaluate it. So if it's just a small, crack in a certain corner, it's nice if you can get a foundation expert in to see, how can we fix this? How can we mitigate it? And sometimes it's a simple thing like a little bit of core filling and rebar just to sort of reinforce one area that might have maybe had a little bit of that sort of freeze thaw, that water infiltration on the outside. But it's always nice when you can bring in another expert to look at it, and then you can make an informed decision if you're ready to move forward.
Yeah, and I feel like the sentiment when you're talking to consumers is like anything that's a foundation issue is a $30,000 job. But if you do have like a little bit of puddling or water infiltration in one of the corners, chances are it could just need like blue skin or something, which is like, a $5,000 to $10,000 job, which is, still expensive, especially when you're putting out money for a house, but it's not detrimental. Like if the house is perfect, there are ways to fix it on the cheap as opposed to, a $30,000, $40,000 job.
Oh, absolutely. And in bigger markets, we see people, raising homes and changing the foundations completely. Yeah. 100-year-old homes will get that treatment because the value is there. So sometimes the value is still there in the home. And if you're willing to do the work and you can get the work done, then it's not an issue. But certainly in our market, our prices are a little lower. So you're always looking as they're definitely big red flags that we should watch out for.
For sure.
All right. Red flag number 2, roof problems. So most buyers will look at the roof and will kind of look for curling shingles and that type of wear and tear. Have you ever seen any roof issues come up in your practice?
Always.
Yes.
Always. The problem is, especially in the winter, you can't see what you can't see. Like, especially when there's 3 feet of snow on every roof, you don't know. And sometimes it's the spring when the snow gets super heavy that things start changing in the attic and, trusses start to break and et cetera, et cetera. But the biggest thing I would say is try to get up on the roof, maybe not in the winter, but if you can't get onto the roof in the winter, get up into the attic in the winter. Make sure that the home inspectors are going up and checking if there's access to the attic, which there usually is. But even to look at it from the inside, it'll tell you basically everything you need to know. Shingles, for the roof system, the shingles are probably the cheapest thing that you can fix. So it's not a huge detriment. But when you look at trusses and, sheathing and all the, main proponents of a roof, those are the things that are the most important. So I would say you need to get into the attic, especially during a home inspection.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it's great when a seller can keep their documentation and give us, a receipt for the work that was done. The roof was changed in, say, 2021, have a receipt from a roofing provider. But like you said, it's also, if you can't see, if you're purchasing in the winter and let's say there's snow all over the roof, when the inspector goes into the attic, they can look for signs of additional wear and tear. Like maybe even if the roof isn't that old, it could be susceptible to like ice damming. It could have been damaged. Could have been damaged due to wind. There could be a few missing shingles, which, can be easily replaced. But sometimes it's a larger issue with roof ventilation that then causes more deterioration on a roof. Yeah.
So say it's the middle of summer, you can see shingles, you can see roof. Like, what do you think are the biggest things to look out for? Especially like even looking from the ground floor, when you're looking up at a roof, what are you kind of searching for?
So as a realtor, we're not experts in the inspection field, certainly, but we're always looking for just the signs of curling. You often will see on a much older roof where the shingles start to curl. You'll look for signs of damage from past ice damming in the summer. In the winter, of course, you're going to look for icicles and that type of thing forming on the roof sides and in the eaves troughs as well. Yeah,
I think one thing that I would add to that would be, this sag in the roof. If you can see like a visual sag in the roof, it's not a big issue, but it's definitely needs more investigation. So obviously that's when you're going into the attic and seeing, are those trusses broken, or is it just, a little bit of, if it's a 100-year-old house, it's obviously the wood's getting old, so you can kind of, reframe it or resupport it. But I think that's definitely another thing to add onto the list for sure.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So I have a question for you. Okay. Would you rather buy a house with a leaky basement or a roof that needed replacement?
A roof that needs a replacement or shingles that need
that's a good distinction. Yeah. Okay.
If it's shingles, I prefer shingles probably every time. I hate foundation issues because we've run into a few of them. So I would say I think I would rather roof work than foundation work.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Okay, so I'm much the same. I think that water in the basement can be difficult to mitigate. Certainly it's a bit of a concern for mold and health hazards and that type of thing. But I mean, we didn't make a mistake. I wouldn't say we didn't make a mistake, but we bought a home that we knew needed a new roof, right? And it seemed to be, in our practice, we can understand how much in general a roof like this should cost.
Yeah.
However, the house was in British Columbia, and they have much different practices and environmental regulations than we have here in Ontario. So we soon discovered, once we got roofing companies in there to actually give us quotes, that because the home, it was a 100-year-old home, it had cedar shake shingles as the original shingle that was put on in 1912, and then had several layers of asphalt on top of that.
They put asphalt right on top of this, on top of the shake.
There might have been something built on
Like
top
a board.
of that.
Yeah.
But the problem was that because you had these two different types of material, and BC is very environmentally conscientious and whatnot, the cedar could be recycled and reused. So the cedar and any wood product had a separate bin than disposing of the asphalt shingles.
Nice.
So it
Wow.
cost us like probably more than double what you would pay in Ontario
Yeah.
to have a very simple roof.
I can't imagine the roofers up there. Okay, shingle, this bin, cedar shake, this bin, throwing them off the roof.
Everything had to be separated,
Wow.
and that cost us a lot more than if it had been just pure asphalt shingle replacement.
So what did you replaced it with asphalt shingles?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, typical like 30-year shingles. I do believe I think we might have had additional sheathing put on there, but it was like $25,000.
Ouch.
For a roof. Yeah, and it's not a very big house either.
Yeah.
So I might look back and say maybe next time we would deal with a leaky basement.
Yeah. Come on, cash flow, help us out.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of old homes, we've owned several, old, almost 100-year-old homes now as well. Old wiring is something we see in older homes and can be a bit of an issue. So what have you seen in your practice in terms of wiring? And
I mean, so obviously the knob and tube that everybody talks about is detrimental to any house, and usually detrimental to any deal that's going on as well. But obviously home inspectors can let you know if it's actually being used or not. They track it back to the panel if it's totally disconnected, because they used to screw them into the joists. So lots of people just left like the actual wiring and the knobs, let's say. So you really have to get it inspected to see if it's actually being used. If not, it's probably fine to leave in there. But then also lots of people, like we had one in the brokerage last year, that lots of people change the wiring until you can't see it anymore, hook it up to the old knob and tube, and it runs throughout the house. And then they put a nice flashy new, receptacle on top of it, and you don't know ever again. Until you get it inspected 30 years later, and you realize that the whole house is basically knob and tube wiring, and it's going to cost you, $30,000-$40,000 to rewire the whole house. I would say obviously behind that would be aluminum wiring. And I feel like a lot of people really do not like aluminum wiring, but it's really about the practice of, ensuring, because when aluminum wiring is screwed into a receptacle, as the power goes back and forth through it shrinks the size of the wire. So you have to tighten it. So it's, maintenance that most people will not do because they don't want to touch wiring or electrical at in any point of the house. But it is something that is not as scary as some people think, as long as you're doing the maintenance that's needed. If you're not going to do the maintenance, then you need to get it changed to copper to keep the house safe.
Yeah, we've seen several homes that have been built in that sort of like early, I think 1970s, that have had aluminum wiring. Certainly New Sudbury, there's quite a few semi-detached homes and regular detached homes that have had the aluminum wiring certainly in there. And what I've heard from the home inspectors, sometimes the problem can be when they're also mixed with copper, when partial copper, partial aluminum, and they don't have the proper like receptacles to deal with aluminum wiring. Well, I had a deal not too long ago, maybe it was a couple years ago now, where there was partial aluminum and partial copper in the panel. And we had a master electrician go in, and we had this part of the conditions with the seller was going to have a master electrician just to do, I think it's called pigtailing, in the panel. And that is applying, I think, the proper connectors within the panel. and getting a receipt to say that it was done by a master electrician, that it was all good.
Okay.
So yeah, so there are ways, like you said, maintenance things that you can do for aluminum wiring, and there's ways to mitigate aluminum wiring. You don't have to rewire the whole house necessarily. That's often been the advice that my clients certainly have received, but you can have a master electrician go in and assess whether the wiring is good.
So have you ever had a deal fall through because of, faulty wiring?
I think aluminum wiring is one of those things that has been a bit of a tough thing to wrap a buyer's head around if you know about it before having an inspector walk you through the process. And then certainly little bits of knob and tube have been concerning to some clients as well. I don't know if anybody's ever walked away from a deal per se because of it, but I think it is definitely a bit of a deterrent for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never had a deal fall through because of the wiring. We've had a couple, close calls, or, we had to fix one run of wiring or whatever it was. But then you think of, there's a condo corporation, the townhouse corporation, and they realized when they built, actually, I guess they realized it way after, but the whole complex was built with aluminum wiring.
Oh, wow.
And so when they did, they had some maintenance issues, so they brought in an electrician. They're like, listen, like, this is a serious issue. So insurance skyrocketed on the condo corporation, which obviously falls down to the homeowners. And then so they had to have an electrician come in, and I think they changed, was it all the panels, changed them to GFCI, like the receptacles, like they did a ton of maintenance on it.
Okay.
So I know, like, and this is current, so they're going back to the insurance company and trying to get obviously a lower rate. But yeah, I mean, it could be a non-issue and it could be a massive issue like that one was.
Yeah, that I mean, there's certainly it's a bigger issue when it's in a big condo corporation like that, and sort of row houses that are one against the other. But I suppose there might be some, just sort of a nice what am I trying to say? Comforting factor is a little bit more comfortable for some people when you have a condo corporation or other people helping with the situation and other people to sort of help you mitigate it. And if it's a big group of people going through the process, hopefully it can get resolved and be done in a timely manner.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's our red flag number 4?
Red flag number 4, plumbing and water damage, which is awful. I'm going through that right now because it's spring and it rains, and when it's nice out, it rains. And then I know we're starting way too early. Yeah. But so water stains on the drywall in the basement, efflorescence on the concrete. What's a minor issue, and what do you think like a deal breaker would be to you or to your clients?
Yeah. So it always comes down to what is the client's risk tolerance and what is their ability to fix things, right? Yep. But I think, like you said, maybe some water staining that you can see, where is that coming from exactly? Maybe it's an old window in a basement that needs a window well, and that's something that you can mitigate. But when it's a larger issue and you see maybe, like you mentioned, efflorescence kind of all along the foundation, one side or all throughout, that can definitely be concerning. Yeah.
I mean, you definitely see, especially in Sudbury, like we have such like a high water table, and half of the city seems to be in a floodplain. So, it's not that it's like you're never going to buy a house that one day will not have an issue. So it's just about how to kind of remedy that. And then you see a ton of rock in the basement that you're never going to get away from having water in your basement when you have a rock in your basement. So it's about where the water is going, how to, make sure the dehumidifier is on, make sure you have a trench to a sump pump or whatever it is. So there are ways definitely to mitigate, and it's not the end of the world. But obviously, when you have an indoor swimming pool in your basement, that's a major issue. Yeah,
I think anytime there's, water in contact with organic material, and then you can have that mold growth, that's the biggest issue, really. Like you said, if you can have, we do see it often with some rock in the basement here, but if you have a little bit of water that trickles through and it dries up over time and you're not using your basement for a ton of storage, or you're not going to finish it, then that's something that you can mitigate and avoid any of those kind of health hazards. I think it's whenever you've got the potential for like mold growth and that type of health hazard, that's, really an issue with.
It's major.
With water.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, red flag number 5 and the last one, HVAC and insulation. So obviously, furnaces can be a big expense, air conditioners can be a big expense, but, I guess what are you looking for when an inspector says this issue is, happening with the furnace, or you need to get it changed, like, I guess what's the process?
So with HVAC systems, and particularly furnaces, the real problem is when the appliance becomes obsolete and not worth repairing anymore, right? Sometimes we see furnaces that are, still going from the 90s and doing really well.
Yeah.
And if your bills aren't too high and you can mitigate it, that's fine. But just be prepared that if something goes on the motor or the blower or something, you're going to have to budget for replacing that.
It's a full replacement.
Yeah,
it's not just
absolutely.
a part.
Yeah.
I have, in one of my buildings, I have a boiler from, it's got to be the 60s or 70s. Like, it is ancient. And we actually had some techs come in and give us a quote on, updating it. And really, like, their answer was, we can do it, and we can give you a new boiler for, $15,000 to $20,000 that, will also not die. But just live this one out. Like, this one, chances are, will never die.
Yep.
And just keep going with it.
Yeah.
So I appreciated not having to spend $20,000 on my building. But yeah, we haven't had an issue with it. We've owned it for 5 years, and it just runs like a top. Like, I'm hoping it never dies, but
boilers are a great system. They're very efficient. And like you said, these monsters can operate for 20, 30 years and still be working really, really well.
Yeah.
And the cost to replace a boiler is a lot higher than the cost to replace just a regular forced air furnace. And what we're seeing more and more now is when people get into the situation, an unexpected situation with, let's say, a furnace or an AC that just all of a sudden conks out, and maybe they don't have the funds. Some people are going towards rental appliances.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on rental appliances?
No. Just
don't
no.
do it.
Just no, don't do it. You can get, you see, when, obviously you see them when we're trying to sell houses, and they have a $15,000 rental agreement for a furnace and a air conditioner. You can buy those same appliances. And I know, like, the economy is struggling. People don't have the, expendable money, especially to spend on like a, $5,000-$6,000 issue.
Yeah.
But you can buy a furnace and air conditioner and have it installed for like $5,000, which is 1/3 of what you can rent it for. And I know, $150 to $160 a month is cheaper than $5,000 up front, but in the long run, it just doesn't make sense. And then when somebody wants to buy that house, if you ever want to sell it, people are going to ask you usually to buy it out. And, so it's either going to come now or come later. It's expensive.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's either going to be expensive now and you have to do it, or it's going to be more expensive when you go sell your place down the road. And when you look at it over time, like, you're paying a rental cost that's much more expensive than the cost of that system to replace it.
Yeah.
So might even be in your better interest to maybe just get a small loan or do some kind of payment plan if you can with a provider to get a new appliance installed, a new HVAC component that you're not on the hook for on a monthly expense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think, Tyler, is one of the biggest misconceptions of the whole home inspection process?
The biggest misconception is that when you get the 70,000 page report that all home inspectors give you after a home inspection, that it is all detrimental stuff. The way it should be explained is that it's a checklist. All homes, there's never going to be a home like the brand new homes have, the same 50-page report. It's just little tiny things. So it's a checklist. The first, couple pages usually are the detrimental stuff that you really need to kind of comb through and see what your risk tolerance is. But the rest of it is, this plug should have a GFCI, get it changed. You can do that, when you buy the house or a couple months down the road. And it's just like, print it off, keep it in your folder and say, you know what, we're going to do these things this month. We're going to do these things this month. And so you don't have to do it all at the same time, but it's exactly what I just said. It's a checklist for what to do in the future.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think a lot of buyers think, is this house a pass or a fail?
Yeah.
And they sort of want to know, should I buy this or should I not buy this? And like you said, it's going to be about all of those components and all of those items on the list, whether they're big items, small items, immediate items, or items maybe in, the next 5 to 10 years that you're going to need replacement. Just getting them on the list and having that plan to fix those things and to bring your property to a higher standard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's finish up there. Let's finish up with one question. what's the one piece of advice in going into a home inspection that you'd give to one of your buyers?
I always recommend my buyers to attend the inspection if they can, because if they can hear it directly from the inspector, they can understand the severity of the item or the urgency of the item that might be, on that list. So if they can hear it directly from the inspector, I think that's my biggest, piece of advice is just to be there.
Yeah. That's a perfect piece of advice to finish up on. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into the TNT Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to leave us a comment, subscribe, and share with a friend who might be interested in real estate.
We'll catch you next time, and until then, stay ahead in real estate.